Welcome to today's episode of Is It Really the Recruit Who Is Struggling?, where we take a deep dive into the challenges and realities of problem-based learning in training environments. I'm Malena, the president of the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Gerry, one of the co-founders of the society, lawyer and law professor, and Tim, who is a retired captain from the Riley County Police Department and a certified level 2 problem-based learning instructor, and currently is the captain of the Glenn County Police Department in Brunswick, Georgia, with the occasional drop-in of Art that hopefully he joins us, but maybe he may not be able to join us today. Today, we're tackling a tough but important question. Are recruits truly struggling, or are the problems we're designing for them failing to set them for the success they need? In police academies, training programs, and other high-stakes learning environments, recruits are being trained with structured exercise, clear-cut scenarios, and step-by-step solutions that don't fully prepare them for the fast-moving, high-pressure situations they will encounter in the field. In a problem-based learning classroom, we craft ill-structured problems, real-world challenges without a clear-cut solution that will help them in the day-to-day operations. But how do we ensure that these problems help them develop critical thinking rather than just leave them frustrated? In this episode, we'll have a conversation about this. So let's jump in, and I'm going to direct this question to Gerry. Let's start with the basics. How would you define an ill-structured problem in the context of problem-based learning?
I think I'll keep it nice and simple. Think of problem-based learning and think of ill-structured problems as simply police radio calls. Every single radio call an officer attends could be considered and should be considered an ill-structured problem. I don't care whether it's a homicide in progress, a bicycle theft, a car accident. They could be very simple or they could be incredibly complex. And one of the things that I think the beauty of the problem-based learning approach is that we're trying to train the recruits how to think of multiple ways to address one particular issue. Now you think, oh, well, why would you do that? It's a bicycle theft. Or why would you do that? It's a car accident. Well, everyone who's ever attended any radio call knows that you never know what you're getting when you step outside of that patrol car. I remember going to calls thinking, oh, this is going to be one thing, and it was something completely different. And that variability, that unknown quantity or unknown quality of what police work actually represents is what you need to understand is an ill-structured problem. It's something we don't know. We have no concept of what it's going to evolve into. We don't have all the information. We know that it's grounded in complexity, and we also understand that it has to be addressed in some particular way. So you might not solve the whole problem, but you may solve a little bit of it. So I'm sorry to come at it so theoretical, but fundamentally, if we see problems as radio calls and ill-structured problems as the typical kind of radio call, then I think we can understand what we're dealing with here. Tim may have a different kind of approach to an ill-structured problem, but that's my way of thinking of it. It's a radio call that we would attend for service. Tim, how would you look at it?
So I was talking to Malena before we started about my first week of work here and encountering multiple ill-structured problems every day. Working with people, working within an organization is often a series of you uncover problems, issues. Maybe people know they exist, maybe they don't. Most of the time, they know they exist on a certain level. And how do you solve these problems? Because an ill-structured problem generally has multiple moving pieces. It's not easily solved. Typically, and we'll talk about this probably when we talk about building them, but there are problems for which the recruit currently lacks, the essential skills to solve them. You don't build a problem that they already know how to solve, even though they may prefer a problem they already know how to solve. So you create this a level of ambiguity, which people have different comfort levels with that. And I think you were talking earlier about high levels of discomfort with ambiguity, with uncertainty. And Gerry touched on, I think, a very key component of the ill-structured problem, or understanding it, is understanding what a solution is. I think oftentimes we get caught up in trying to achieve solutions which eliminates the problem entirely. It's gone. It's totally solved. And typically that's not what happens. So success can mean, in other words, you lessen the frequency of a problem. You lessen the severity of a problem. You may shift it to somebody else because somebody else is really in a better position to solve that. So particularly in an organization, as I see perfection, total solving the problem, probably not going to do that. But can you make things better? Does your solution improve? It may not be what this person does, but does it work? Does it solve the problem in some way? So I think starting from that standpoint and understanding that you don't have to, your solution could get rid of it, solve it, it never happens again. But that's unlikely. So can you be comfortable with, okay, it doesn't happen as much. It still happens, but it doesn't happen as much, or it's not as severe. Crime, for example, you're never going to totally eliminate it, but can you lessen the frequency, lessen the severity, bring other partners on board to help you? Yeah, you can do those things. So I think that's a key component of the ill-structured problem, is understanding the different levels of solutions.
I think what messes people up, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tim, but what messes especially police officers is the concept of ill-structured problem. What the hell does ill-structured mean? Well, it's not that it's poorly structured. It's that it has kind of unknown and undefinable qualities to it. And I think that's important. It's named that way because academics named it that way when they were designing it for medical school, which is where the ill-structured problem comes from. Young doctors were taught that when they're facing a new patient, they have to consider a whole raft of possible outcomes and possible problems that they're going to face. And when we applied it to policing, exactly the same circumstances are there. Ill-structured simply means we don't understand where this problem could take us, and we have to be able to adapt our thinking to accommodate wherever it does take us. And that's what I think police officers learn to do instinctively once they've been on the job for a little while. And why we've incorporated into police training is because the sooner we can get them doing it at the academy, the better off they're going to be once they're out there on their own. And the fewer calls they'll make to senior officers or to sergeants or captains like yourself to say, hey, how do I do this? That's why we need to use ill-structured problems and why we need to get them started very soon.
No, I agree. I think that your connection to the radio call is a perfect example. And even though bike theft, it's just a bike theft, I know how to do that. But when you show up, it could be so much more than just a bike theft. You could have an element of custody issues between parents, or who knows what. You think it's A, and so I think of emergency radio calls, and oftentimes things will come out as, oh, we're going to this, and no, it's not that. Most of the time it's not a dismembered body, but okay, sometimes it is. You don't know. and being open to not knowing, not making assumptions, because I think you can run into issues where there's this, especially with uh, with good problem solvers or more experienced people in general, life skills. I know what this is. They go for easy, simple, and what they think the solution is. But if you dig a little bit more, oh, oh, so there's all these new elements that come in that change it. There's no single call. And I was explaining this to somebody. I was actually explaining illustrated problem to somebody who works for me this week, and talking about the variety of directions that one could go. The typical you show up, one of the very first problems in the program. You show up at a domestic, and there's been calls there before, but an arrest has never been made. And you arrive at the house, and there's counterclaims of violence, and there's no physical evidence, and you've got children present, and the place is unkempt, and um, the female half says there's drugs upstairs in the drawer, and so you've got all of these elements, and some people will focus on, it's a domestic violence, we got to make an arrest. Or some people who have the heart for the kids. Oh no, we got a child in need of care issue. We got to get these kids out of this house. Or you've got the drug hounds who focus on, the drugs. I need to get to the drugs. And in the context of all of this, the recruit will learn about domestic violence. Will learn about laws dealing with children in need of care. We'll learn about search and seizure laws. We'll learn about arrest laws. Probably will need to learn about use of force and powers that statutory issues dealing with that, and all of these other things. And that it's a perfect example of an ill-structured problem. You've got all of these other elements, and there's no one solution that is perfect, that everybody agrees on. And what you want is, as you said, you don't want the officer call and say, "Hey, I've never done this before," because that's going to happen all the time. What do I do? You want, "I've never done this before. Here's what I think I should do." And then, as the supervisor, you can try to facilitate a little bit if necessary. Well, have you considered this? Or and it takes a good supervisor to say this. Okay, that's not exactly how I would do it, but there's nothing wrong with that solution. Go ahead and do that, and we'll talk later, rather than it has to be my solution. No, I don't agree with that. You need to do this. So I'll end there.
I think maybe we can, one of the things that maybe we can wrap it up, hearing everyone's points. There's some, if I want to define the characteristics of the ill-structured problem, maybe perhaps there's an ambiguity, right? There's not really like a clear or right or wrong answer, and it's room for interpretation too. I might see the problem in a different lens. You might see it with a different lens, and you might see it with a different lens. Why? Because we come from different backgrounds, different life experiences, and different perspectives at the same time, right? Then you have multiple solutions. You mentioned that, Tim. So different approaches to actually tackle that problem or the solution. And you also mentioned about that evolving nature, that you may have the problem and you understand these parameters, but once you start digging into the case, you uncover or unpeel that layer of the onion. Oh, I didn't see this layer before, right? And context driven, you mentioned context there. So the same real life that we have, right, is going to change that problem as well, right? Yes. Anything else that we would like to add to that?
Yeah, no ill-structured problem is artificial. We'll get to this later when we're talking about how to design them, but our ill-structured problems are real life, they're complex, they are partially or wholly solvable, and they contain a multitude of issues that are going to require specific knowledge from the officer. So that's kind of a brief summary of what we put in the PTO and PBL books when we wrote it.
Awesome. So perhaps we can dig deeper a little bit, but just for the topic of evolving the conversation, right? I think we have covered why it matters in training. At the same time, facing that real life scenario. Let's go maybe perhaps to addressing struggling recruits. We have had this actually question from one of our listeners. So what kind of challenges struggling recruits face when engaging with this problem-based learning methodology of they don't have a checklist anymore? Now I have a problem. What am I supposed to do? Where is my checklist? So any ideas on how to address this?
I'll let Tim go first because I'm gonna go after this one a little bit. So Tim's much more rational than I am. I'll let Tim talk.
Well, first I would ask someone, what do you mean? Can you define what struggling is? And I think you defined a certain aspect of it. Students bringing to, say, your class, and an expectation that they're going to get checklists and there's going to be an objective test and memorization and move on. And so how is that expectation? Why did they have that expectation to begin with? Well, it's because they were taught that way. So it was prior instructors throughout their lives, perhaps, who created that expectation that this is how you learn via a checklist. I'll feed it to you and then you memorize it and you give it back to me. So I think that's one aspect of what a struggling student might be. Someone who is struggling with this process because that's not how they have been taught up to that point. I think if you had students very familiar with PBL and then they come to your class, they're probably they're not going to be struggling. So in that context, why are they struggling? Is it the student or has it been the teacher? And so that's part of a struggling student is a ill-structured problem in itself, right? So how do you define that? What do you know about why they're struggling, what they're struggling with? I think it goes back to what they often say in the program. It's not how smart you are, it's how you're smart. Everybody that comes to you has a capacity to learn, but they do it differently. And maybe the struggle is with the instructor and it's not with the student, but it could very well be with the student. So defining the problem, I think, is one of the first steps. What are they struggling with? How are they struggling? Then you're dealing with, as an instructor, you're facing the ill-structured problem. Okay, how do I help them over whatever difficulties I'm identifying? So that's the first question that I have about this, the general struggling. So you hear about this in policing, the struggling recruit, all the time. People complaining about the struggling recruit. Help me understand what you mean by struggling. So that's the first thing that I would go after is what do you mean? What are they struggling with? And then let's go from there.
I'd support everything Tim just said. When we were asked to write this program in the late 90s, what we found in policing is that we were losing a lot of the people that we wanted to keep, specifically people from other cultures, women, a lot of women, really well-educated people, and we were losing them because they didn't problem solve, they didn't address solutions, they didn't come to the same conclusions that a lot of their training officers came to. And that was seen as wrong. And I'm not undermining training officers. That's not my purpose here. But every one of us knows that we might not solve a problem the same way as the person sitting in the police car next to us. We all have our own way of doing things. And what was happening is that there was kind of a monoculture. We act the same way, we do the same way, we talk the same way, we address people the same way throughout the 80s and 90s. And it started way back in professional policing in the 1930s when they tried to professionalize it. We tried to get people talking in the same kind of, taking the same approach to the citizenry. Well, that doesn't work when we're dealing with individuals inside those uniforms, specifically different levels of education, men, women, different cultures. So what the beauty of recognizing, as Tim says, the struggle, the nature of the struggle, is that it is probably 50, 60% recruit. And maybe a good portion of that is also that the instructor isn't speaking to the particular needs, the learning needs of that learner. And again, this is not to trash the instructors. Nobody's giving them that information on how to do it. We learn how to be tellers. We learn how to be doers. We expect them to do mimetic learning. Mimetic, I do it, you follow me. But for a lot of people, they're experiential learners. They have to do it. And they do it in a way that works for them, especially this latest generation, the ones that have come on, the millennials and the post-millennials. They take different approaches to how they do things, as everybody knows. So we too, as instructors, and as I teach at a university, and there's no way I could teach the current crop of students the way I taught 20 years ago. It's just not the same. So part of it, as Tim says, is wait a minute, let's define struggle. Let's define what it is, the problem. And the first place we have the most impact is how we're addressing it. The military has a great phrase. They say, there are no bad teams, just bad leaders. And I always think of my own classrooms. If I've got a whole classroom of people and struggling, the problem's not my students. The problem is me, because I'm not getting them the information and the ability and the structure to do the learning they need to do. And I think what we can do in policing is we can facilitate the different types of learning without having to tell people, do it like I do it, or you're not doing it right. And I'm seeing a nice movement in that kind of approach in policing. We are getting much better at doing this. So I want to be positive about that. But yeah, I think Tim's absolutely right. Let's look at the problem and say, okay, what do you mean struggling? Define what struggling is. I'll give an example. Back in the day, they used to say, well, the women aren't putting their hands on. Well, we acculturate women from their nappies in their early life, right through their teens and into early adulthood, not to do that, and not to be aggressive, and not to be, physical. And then they come into the job as police officers, and we're saying, heck, how come you're not putting your hands on right away as quickly as I do, your male training officer? And I think that stereotype, and that sexist stereotype, is something that really caused problems for a lot of women back 20 and 30 years ago. Again, I'm delighted to say we're moving away from those kind of thinkings and those kind of behaviors, and we're getting better at it. But you see how easy it is to get caught up thinking that the problem is with the rookie or the problem is with the learner, and it's not with how I'm teaching that rookie how to behave or what to do and finding their own answers to the problem that I've given them.
Just a quick follow-up to that hands-on thing, I think illustrates this point exactly. How come you're not putting your hands on as quickly as I am? A good instructor, facilitator, trainer, when confronted with that problem, will ask themselves, or should, well, am I putting my hands on too soon? I mean, look, is what I'm doing the right thing? Because it might, well, maybe I'm too aggressive. Maybe we go hands-on too soon, too easily. Maybe we don't consider other things. Maybe that's not the case. But I think self-assessment component, um, going back to why are they struggling, is part of the problem with me. And of course, we try to teach that to the recruits through EI. And I think that's an important element for the facilitator, obviously, as well, is the first question, okay, what am I doing? Am I contributing to this struggling? And maybe I'm not, but I won't know unless I ask myself that question.
And yeah, you mean emotional intelligence, Tim?
Now, what did I say?
Yeah. No, I'm saying no. You said EI, but I'm just for the audience.
Yes.
For those of you who don't, that phrase is emotional intelligence. So it's just one of the core competencies in the program.
Now, to follow up, you mentioned different learning styles, right? Different learning abilities and experiences that we'll bring. So how can we do better, maybe perhaps as facilitators, on addressing these different learning? I'm not talking about learning disabilities. I'm talking about learning styles, right? So if we recall that is that visual, that the reading part or the mathematical part or the musical part, etc. Correct? So in a diverse group, and yeah, maybe COPs, when I think about the classes that I teach in some ways design and I teach development. So I get the stereotypical designers, they're all, like all over the place. And then I get the developers that they're very linear thinkers, right? And then if I think about the COP environment, we have those stereotypical recruits, but at the same time, everybody's going to learn differently, correct? So everybody's going to have a struggle on them. So how can we maybe challenge those students and we maybe discuss this to be resilient? Because I believe that that's one of the issues of that struggle that I'm seeing repeatedly in some of the courses that I teach. I'm not sure about the police environment, but being resilient, that you may not get a good solution right now and you might fail, but perhaps the next idea that you get on how to solve this, it will be the good one. So how can we address that?
Well, I'll take a run at that one because it is a keen area of interest. Gardner, who wrote the book about multiple intelligences, said it got waylaid in the science got waylaid on that one. And I don't think there are learning styles. And he said very clearly, we don't think about them as styles. So you don't try to teach somebody in a particular style. What you do is you think about, you walk up to a building and you got a whole ring of keys. And one of the keys is going to open the door. That's kind of the way we think about learning. Some people are big picture, spatial body kinesthetic. Other people are introverted and they're intrapersonal. They're existential learners. So there's all kinds of different kinds of learners. We know that, but you're not going to sit there and go, okay, well, what's my approach with this learner? That's the job of the learner to say to the coach, listen, I don't, when you tell me stuff, I don't hear it as well, but if you could show it so I can read it, then I could pick it up better. So that really is when coaches are sitting down at the beginning with their trainees, it's their job to say, how do you acquire information? For me, I do it. I'm very body kinesthetic and I'm very visual. Other people, there's a beat, they're mathematical or they're musical. They're both the same or very similar. There's kind of rhythmic and segmented kind of approaches. Other people are straight up logical mathematical, and other people are way out on the kind of far reaches of they're less organized, and that's okay. All that needs to be done on that is that you have a conversation with your trainee and say, what's the best way for me to get information to you? And for the training officer to say to the trainee, well, I like to teach this way, but you tell me if there's another way I can do it. I mean, as a lawyer, I've taken instructions from people, and I can ask them, and I'm never going to get it verbally, but if I get them to draw it out for me, that's probably easier for them. So it's a simple example like that. And I'm not saying you're sitting there trying to draw stuff out with people, but you use whatever tools are available to you to deal with people you meet in your day-to-day work. And especially in education, if I even to get the original grant for us to write the PTO program, we explained everything we wanted to do. We had academic papers, we had all this other stuff. And what ended up explaining it was just getting up there and drawing a picture for the people in the room in Washington to say, here's what the program looks like. And many of the people there were very visual, and they say, oh, okay, we get it. And given that cops are big picture, spatial, body kinesthetic, interpersonal learners, that really helps. And strangely, quite strong in the musical capacity too. Whenever we test cops, we always find they really are rhythmic and they like musical. Not so great logical, mathematical, and some of the other ones, but that doesn't matter. Everybody's responsible for understanding their own keys to those locks I talked about, and then expressing that to their trainer or their trainee.
And I would follow up with, I think something you mentioned, and you may not have said it directly, Malena, but you referenced, I think, comfort levels with failure, and I think that's a key component to a successful learning organization is accepting failure, being, making a culture in which it's okay to fail, to not get it right the first time. And I think the resiliency issue, I think the more you fail, are allowed to fail, and given the support to succeed, the more resilient you are. I mean, let's face it, if all of us would think about probably some of our greatest successes, they were likely preceded by an incredible failure, because we were able to learn and apply that to the next iteration of our solution. And so it has to be okay within the organization to try and to not succeed, provided you're trying within the organization's mission and values and all of that. It's got to be okay to get it wrong.
It's funny, Tim, when you're absolutely right, but when we tried to tell people that in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, we had people come back and say, "Oh, so you're willing to let rookies go out and not do well at a shootout, or not to go and arrest the right person?" And they use these extreme examples, and clearly that's not what you're saying, or what we were saying back then. What we're saying is we create these problem-based learning exercises, which are now called action reports, and we create these learning modules when the students are in their classroom at the academy learning, so that there isn't that risk. We give them real life problems that they can apply potential solutions to, and if they fail in there, well, that's great, because then we learn as human beings from the colossal mistakes we made, not from the great successes that we have. We probably learn more and remember more when we do get it wrong, as you said, Tim. So I think it's really important that nobody jumps on that and says, "Oh my God, you're going to go out and let the rookie fail." Of course, we're not going to do that. That's not what the way the program works. The program works by getting them to think in right away in the academy. Here's a problem. How would you address it? And if they fail it, you don't leap all over them and say, "Oh my God, how could you get that wrong?" Of course they're going to get it wrong. They're not experienced police. But in policing, and I don't think anybody listening to this would argue with me, over the years, we've been failure adverse. We think we can't fail, or we'll somehow get sued, or will be, cost lives or things like that. And that's simply not true. there's lots of potential for failure in policing, and we see it. And it's best to do that failure in a controlled environment like the classroom, and not when they're out on the street on their own and they make those mistakes. Make the mistakes when you can control it in the academy, in their field training. Don't let it happen 5 years down the line when they've never faced an experience.
That's exactly right. That's what the training environment is for. That is where you want the failure to occur there, so that the right processes become ingrained. And so I'll just use that quick example for the use of force people that think, oh, you want them to fail at a shootout or whatever. We started with the Riley County Police Department reality-based training very, very early, at least early in the state of Kansas. We were one of the early adopters of it. And we would build scenarios. There are parameters, and our goal was we're going to get at this until the officer succeeds. The officer is not going to walk away losing in any situation like this. So back in the day, and the gun guys will understand all of this, we didn't have dedicated simulated firearms. We had conversion kits that you'd drop a new barrel into a weapon, or you'd put a shell into a shotgun that was a dummy round, but it simulated firing and whatnot. And so we were doing a scenario in which we had a suicidal subject, and the officers were given the parameters of, okay, if the person gets beyond this point, now they're becoming a danger to other people, and we're going to use less lethal, particularly shotgun beanbag rounds we had at the time. So we had a simulated shotgun or converted, so there was a simulated shotgun. And one of the officers, he was the less lethal officer, and we had told the role player, you have to get hit twice before you can go down. Don't go down on the first hit, because if you've ever experienced usage of beanbag rounds, you know that they're not the success, and that's why many agencies don't have many. They weren't the success that manufacturers touted. So this officer did exactly as we were training him to do. The role player got beyond the line in the sand, and he fired. And the role player did what he was supposed to, didn't go down. So the officer tried to deliver another round and couldn't. And he couldn't because he didn't cycle the shotgun. And so it was manual cycle. So he tried to pull the trigger and nothing was happening. So, okay, time out. Okay, you've got to cycle. I mean, even reality-based training is pretty stressful. Even though you know no one's getting hurt, there is a tremendous amount of stress to perform correctly. You're in a new situation, so the brain's not exactly knowing how to do it. And so he didn't have that information already to draw on. He didn't have the skill set he needed to solve this problem yet. So we did it over again. And the same thing happened. He fired once, couldn't fire again because he didn't cycle the shotgun. So we're not going to let him walk away a failure. It's okay that this happened. That's the environment, the culture was, it's okay. It's time out. No one yelled. We talked through it. Third time, he got it perfect. So we're trying, and this is what problem-based learning is, we're trying to get them to fail in controlled environments, because if he had faced that situation in the field and never having done any training, reality-based training, likely he would have reacted the same way. He would have fired once, and the subject would have continued at him with a knife, and somebody may have had to use deadly force, or he would have been injured. But because we were able to do this and get this solution written in his brain, now he goes out with that skill set because he faced that problem. So this is what it's all about: is let's make it okay to fail here, and we're not going to allow you to leave a failure. You're going to win. Then you're ready to go out, and if you face that problem or similar problems in the field, then you're going to win. You're not going to fail.
Right. And I guess that's the key with all of those core competencies is you want them practicing each of those kind of things in the various problems that you give them throughout the academy or in the field in the training section of their 14, 16 weeks, whatever, when they're riding with a training officer. And you're having them go through those action reports, those hypothetical situations with you so that they've already got the neural network built up in their brains about, okay, I now know what it is that I'm required to do. And they've even practiced it. I would always tell my rookies, hey, listen, practice saying to yourself when you're in a chase, pretend you're talking on the radio, talk it through. What does that sound like? So you're not screaming, you're not, you don't overreact when you're talking on the radio. Try and keep your voice clear. Practice, practice, practice. And that's the secret. But we tend to think that somehow if we show somebody something on a PowerPoint 6 months earlier, they're going to do what we showed them. And that's the absurdity of mimetic, lecture-based, sage on the stage kind of instruction. It's never going to be retained by a learner in a stressful environment. It's just never going to happen. So what you're suggesting in terms of the reality training, it's not just for shooting shotguns and beanbags shots at a suspect. It's for the criminal law in a classroom when you're trying to teach them what they need to remember when they're arresting somebody for a DUI. It's everything that they have to learn, and they have to learn it in a real life environment. And that real life environment for us, those of us who do this kind of training, is inside the problem.
And perhaps maybe to wrap up this topic, I was thinking about a couple of things that resonated again and again. So creating that safe environment for the students to feel comfortable to fail, right? And no matter how many times they fail, it's okay. Is that failure that is going to help them activate that different habit, different way of responding, that practice, correct? So rather than having a linear, predictable scenario, we'll have a messy, dynamic nature of the real life world inside the academy. So when you're talking about, Gerry, of that recruit facing that problem, you're not throwing them kind of like what my mom did when I went to swim for the first time. She threw me on the pool, right? All of us probably, we're trying to do that in the academy.
Yeah.
Another maybe, I think about my personal experience too, and I thought about the support mechanisms that we provide the students as well. So we understand that there's a lot of different struggles. We don't know why or when. It could be family related, personal, learning disabilities, etc. So providing different support mechanisms for those students too. Do you have a counselor that they can speak to? Maybe they don't need to speak to you directly. Or do you provide any type of emotional intelligence training along the way as well? Do you provide different type of methods for them to learn? Not just a PowerPoint, but do you have a video? Do you have a reading article? Do you have a conversation that they can talk to as well? So that also helps with that safe environment. And it's something that both of you mentioned. Learning is a two-way street in a lot of ways. We need to, every year we're going to get a different set of students, the recruits. They're not the same as the year before. They're going to have different problems, so you need to adapt. We're working with an ill-structured problem in our classroom every year. And what are the needs of those students? So reading that classroom, as you mentioned, cops are very good at that. So how can you read your own students to say, that person is not getting it. I can see sometimes that I'm getting a lot of frustration. So how can I help them get rid of that frustration? Not that I'm giving them the answer, but saying, have you thought about these areas? Do you want to read this article that could help you out? So that's maybe that feeling around the edges that I spoken before that could help out also in these struggling scenarios. And one of the comments that I always get from students that struggle through my classes, they love it at the end, but they say, man, how come you don't give me an answer for this? I'm like, because I cannot give you an answer. I could give you the answer, but it might not be the right one, right? You might think about a better solution that I can never think. And that's where the two learning two-straight learning comes through. That willingness not to have control over the classroom and saying you're going to do it this way. Instead, letting it go, and you don't know how it's going to end up at the end of the year. And hopefully it ends up well. Most of the time it does. But those failure situations, they say, okay, what did we learn from these? Having that moment of reflection as well. What did we learn about this situation, this environment that we put the students through, so that we can adapt quicker maybe next year, or we can bring different strategies, or maybe we can bring a guest speaker to talk about this topic, etc. Perfect. Well, that's a wrap up then for this episode. Today we tackle great questions. We tackle about how ill-structured problems help build real-world decision-making skills, creativity out there, and how also to design and facilitate these problems effectively. Maybe one key takeaway, recruits will fail in order to succeed. We want to do it in that safe environment if we want to have better, more adaptable officers and professionals in the future, right? A huge thank you again to Gerry and team, of course, for the discussion today. And to you listeners, we appreciate you tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review via our website or our podcast, pspbl.org, or email us at info@pspbl.org. We'd love to hear from you. What challenges do you face in training recruits? So until next time, keep designing better learning experiences, keep pushing for smarter training, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.